welcome to Folha de S.Paulo. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, thank you.
So I would like to start this conversation talking about this 20 years after Meeting in Captivity have launched. I'd like to hand you your own metaphor back and to ask you how are the contemporary captivities of our relationships nowadays? Which prisons remain the same and which new captivities have emerged as a reflection of our times?
And at the time, I was interested in how does desire survive, domesticity or family life or children, and the verb was sustain. Like, what does it take to stay awake and interested and energized for long term, especially if it's not about children? And what is desire? What is the meaning of a relationship that is alive? Today, I'm asking the question: what ignites it? What ignites it in light of life that is increasingly disembodied, that is increasingly non-physical and on screen, that is contactless, so that the senses are not really participating nearly as much as they have, and where there is a lack of friction, so that you don't come in contact with enough people and enough people who are different from you. And that is taking us into a whole new direction. So that's a new captivity. It's the captivity of living in a digital landscape where our senses, our physicality are being flattened. I think another captivity is the fact that many activities that used to be social are now either disappearing or individual. And there's a statistic that constantly kind of calls to me, which is that 74% of the food that is cooked in American restaurants is eaten off the premises today. So what happens when all these things that brought you in contact with other people are receding into the individual realm? That's another captivity. At the same time, there are things that have fundamentally changed. We have experienced a complete permission to redefine what is a family, what is a couple, what is a circle of care, what is monogamy, what are the expectations that we bring to modern love. And I think that all these conversations are quite new, because for so long relationships were organized around duty and obligations. You didn't need to think these things through, it was determined for you. Now you negotiate, and if you need to negotiate, you need to know what you think, and if you know what you think, you need to know who you are, and to know who you are, you need to be in relationship with other people.
And here in Brazil, there's another research that shows that 1 in each 4 Brazilians has already put an app to see the partner cell phone. So we are stalking, putting apps to control our husbands or wives or boyfriends and girlfriends. And we call this, I need to know everything so I can trust.
Yes.
How can we build trust of not knowing, of
because that's what trust is. If you need to know, you are not trusting. Trust is, this is Rachel Botsman, who I think is one of the very sharp trust theoreticians. Trust is an active engagement with the unknown. Trust is what you use to close the gap between what you're sure of and what you will never know. That space in between, that is called trust. It's a leap of faith. If you think that surveillance gives trust, you have not understood the way that some societies operate. The more you surveil, the more you feed the notion that there is no trust possible here, therefore you need to control. It's a different logic. Trust is really the ability to live with what you don't know.
I feel that we have de-idealized romantic love, but we have idealized self-love and self-development. So since we are afraid of relating to each other, we just say, you know what, I'm going to focus on myself. I'm going to do an MBA. I'm going to start to meditate. I'm become a vegan. So it's like a sophisticated way of not exposing oneself. How far has this cult of self-love, self-development become a defense against of connecting to each other, and how can we de-invest on this
I mean,
self-development?
it is a symptom of atomization, right? Every little unit alone with itself, working on itself, trying to improve itself, with the hope that once I am a finished, well-developed product or person, I can go and reach out to someone else. Martin Buber, who is one of the great philosophers of relational thinking, has his famous line is that it is in the presence of the other that you discover yourself. If you sit alone, you exist because you are seen by others. You don't sit alone, narcissus, looking at your reflection and thinking that what you see is what it is. So I think it's a very misguided idea. I think what's incredible is to think that this has all now happened in Brazil as well. You were one of the most relational societies that ever existed. The fact that you are going to all the same things as the more puritanical, atomized societies is really shocking to me.
Yeah, there's another research of Poder Data that says that 1 in each 3 Brazilians says that they don't only have one close friend.
That's the same as in the States. Actually, it's 1 in 2. It's shocking because really, for so many years, I contrasted my work when I would work in the States versus work in Brazil, and you were a tight knit fabric, social fabric for so long. So I'm very curious how it became, so similar here. But the notion of building oneself, improving oneself, measuring, hacking, tracking, we have never lived this way. I mean, it is really a very new, robotic,
Yeah, and if you're tracking like your sleep, your glucose, then you want to track how the relationship is going, and it will go up and down.
Right, but glucose levels and relationship is not exactly the same. That's the thing, is that it all gets washed out together. I get it that people need it. The typical answer is people say, I want to feel safe. And my typical answer would be to say then, but safety that has no vitality is another form of constraint. People don't just want to feel safe, they also want to feel alive.
Do you read this real rupture between men and women as two versions of the same disappointment? And how can we stop this us versus them? And no man is a good man, or no women can be trusted.
There is a dynamic in relationships. I'm going to answer it to you from a very micro. It's called hostile dependency. Hostile dependency in a couple or in a pair is when I'm upset at something, but the only way I can feel better is if you do something else, if you change, if you don't do the thing that upsets me. And you are not going to do that thing, so I'm going to be the more angry at you, because I'm going to feel that because of you, I'm feeling bad. And therefore, I depend on you more, because I need you to be the one to change in order to feel better. But you don't do the change, and so I am more angry. And the more I'm angry, and the less you change, and the less you change, and the more I depend on you to do the change. This is one of the classic blame dances. When I don't feel that I can actually change my own state, and this is fascinating because on the one hand, there is such a focus on the self, and on the other hand, the self basically is describing their situation by virtue of what this other gender is doing to make you feel so miserable. What takes us out of this is when you begin to not think, what is the other one doing to me? But simply, what can I do to change something in this thing? In every time in history where there is massive change, things are moving way too fast, shifts are happening literally under your feet, you will notice a degradation of the relationships in the gender and in the intimate sphere.
And here in Brazil, we are having a huge problems with bets. So people are losing a lot of money And we feel that the games will change our lives, but we are not betting on relationships. But we
Hoping.
still think that love is a losing game. How can we think that love can be a winning game?
That's a beautiful question. How can love? Because love is a risk. Love is a risk. Love is a verb that you need to conjugate in many, many different tenses. Love is not a permanent state of enthusiasm. It's a practice, the way that Eric Fromm used to talk about it. And gaming is not a practice. Gaming is giving yourself to chance and hoping that you can defy the odds. It's a totally different experience than betting on love or throwing yourself into love and being hurt and being adored and experiencing a depth of feelings that you haven't felt ever and having heartbreak. I mean, it's a very layered set of experiences to experience love. I think that people are afraid to take those risks today. I think people have a massive lack of experience from very little on, and they experience it as something very dangerous almost, rather than something really adventurous, where risk taking is fun. You know, that's what playfulness is when risk taking is fun, and there is a lack of that at this moment. So people think that love is a dangerous game.
And if you had to leave one final advice for our Brazilian audience on how to build better relationships.
You lost this thing that was so unique to you. You had a lot of vocabulary that helped you with your inner life. You had saudade, you have ficando, you have all these states that were not pathologized, that didn't belong to the world of mental health, that were part of the culture, that were part of the music, of the singing, and that allowed people to experience all kinds of states of life without experiencing them with such acuity. I mean, I grew up in Belgium. We turned to Brazilian music because you had a way of processing life in ways that, you had this carnival, you had these costumes, you had a way of pretending to be one thing and doing something else, of playing and understanding, what it means to bring certain parts of you out and not all of them. And all of that made people feel safe. And I don't know I have no advice to give. I am myself a student and who is collecting advice from everybody else.